easiest way. Here are a couple of examples. I know that I exist, but I never for a minute felt the need to prove that I did exist. Or more importantly, I do believe that I exist, even though I've never seen a very good argument for my existence, or I certainly don't believe it on the basis or because I do have some form of argument. I believe it, and I know it, independently of any argument. So, on this score, Kuyper seems to be in agreement with an impressive array of philosophers, including Aristotle, Rene Descartes, John Locke, who distinguished two sorts of knowledge: demonstrative knowledge and intuitive knowledge. Intuitive knowledge being the foundational knowledge that we have, but knowledge that isn't the result of some form of demonstration or argument that we have given for it. Now, third remark. Kuyper argues that faith, taken in the sense explained, permeates the life of science. And furthermore, that there's nothing wrong with that. Just to indicate, just to give some examples why this idea is supposed to be correct, I'll quickly go through a couple of examples. Science, at least the empirical sciences, they involve observation. Now, in order to do science, scientists have to trust the faculty of perception. As Kuyper says, your ego, as a scientist, your ego believes or must believe your senses. Now, this is the ordinary run of things. It's only in very special circumstances, such as in delirium or fever, or in moments of anxiety or hypochondria or sudden insanity, that we stop believing what our senses teach us. Unless we are in such abnormal conditions, Kuyper holds, the belief in our senses, that's to say, the belief that our senses are by and large reliable, give us true information about the world, is foundational. We hold this belief, but we don't hold it on the basis of some argument or proof. So this is an article of faith in Kuyper's approach. That's the first example. Second example. That's the quotation somewhat halfway in the slide. We actually owe all our convictions of the realism of the object exclusively to faith. Without faith, you can never go from your ego to the non-ego. There's no bridge to be constructed from phenomena to noumena. And he also says it's an undoubted fact that, with the exception perhaps of some weak-minded philosopher, every man, without thinking of verification, is certain every moment of the day that his surroundings actually are as they appear. So that on the ground of this certainty, he acts and works without hesitation. Now, I take it that Kuyper's point is this. All of us, scientists included, need not, and in fact do not believe in the existence of an external world, that is to say, in a world outside of our minds. We don't believe in an external world on the basis of demonstration of argument. We believe in its existence in a foundational way. So that's the second example of the operation of faith in the sciences. In the sciences, we believe we are studying really existent objects existing outside of our minds. But that these objects outside of our minds really exist, that's an article of faith. We accept it, we believe it firmly, we know it, but not on the basis of demonstration.
지금 우리가 5페이지 윗부분에 두 번째 B 영역까지 했습니다.
The third example of faith as it's operative in science. Now, an important element in the life of science is demonstration. But even demonstration, Kuyper maintains, proceeds from faith, proceeds from foundational beliefs. Demonstration requires axioms that cannot be proved and that have to be taken for granted. So think here of such principles as modus ponens, right? The principle that says if A entails B and A is the case, then B is the case. Or take the principle of identity. Everything is identical to itself. Or A is A. These, and there are many, many more principles of logic, modus ponens, modus tollens, etc. Kuyper says, these principles that we use when we are arguing, these principles of logic, they are given with our self-consciousness. They inhere in it. They are inseparable from it. And of themselves, they bring their certainty with them. So he says the moment we are conscious of ourselves, at the very same moment we have implicitly or perhaps even explicitly endorsed the principles of logic. We have accepted them. In our taking and in our having to take for granted unproved and unprovable axioms, Kuyper, as I said, sees faith making its appearance within the realm of science once more. And the final example of faith within the science concerns belief in the existence of general laws. General laws play an important role in the explanatory task of the sciences. Right? There's one type of explanation that we in science give that makes an essential reference to a general law. Why does this piece of iron expand? And we make a reference to a general law. Now says Kuyper, the existence of general laws cannot be proved. Kuyper doesn't mean to say that the formula, for instance, of the law of gravitation rests on faith. The formula itself rests on investigation. But what he does say is that the idea itself, that there are such laws, and that when certain phenomena exhibit itself, you are certain of the existence of such laws. That does not result from demonstration, but it's assumed in your demonstration and is the basis on which your demonstration rests. Without faith in the existence of the general in the special, in laws which govern the special, and in your right to build a general conclusion on a given number of observations, you'd never come to acknowledge any such law. So, that's what he says. Another example of faith within the realms of science is our belief that general laws exist.
네, 지금까지 말한 것이 이제 과학과 신앙과의 관계에 있어서 네 가지 요소, 즉 과학이나 학문에도 신앙적인 요소가 불가피하게 들어있다, 이미 전제되어 있다, 가정되어 있다는 것들을 다양한 예들로 설명했습니다.
Now Kuyper develops these reflections concerning the role of faith in the scientific enterprise, mainly with a focus on the natural sciences. Now this role of faith in the natural sciences, he contends, is often neglected because this faith is the same in all people and therefore makes no difference in the conclusions. The absence of difference or dissensus, however, by no means show that faith plays no role in the sciences, although it does tend to obscure that fact. So, Kuyper's point is, faith plays a role in science. We tend to overlook the fact because within the sciences there is a lot of agreement among the scientists. So, even in natural sciences, faith plays a role. Also, in the humanities, faith plays an important and prominent role. And there it does lead to dissensus. There it does lead to conflicts and differences of opinion. In the humanities, he says, faith enters as an indispensable factor, and in a way which is not the same with all persons. In the humanities, I think that's the next slide.
Next, please.
Yeah. Excuse me. In the humanities, faith seems to operate differently in different persons. So in the natural sciences, he suggests faith operates more or less the same in different persons. But in the humanities, faith operates differently. And there we see dissensus and conflict. In history, for instance, there is an important role assigned to testimony. If you exclude from history any faith in testimony whatsoever and accept nothing but what has been obtained by your own immediate observation or by logical demonstration, then history as a scholarly field would become impossible. Some faith in testimony goes into all of the humanities. It may be that we become disappointed in trusting some particular testimony, but, says Kuyper, though you may be disappointed in your credulity, you do not abandon your ineradicable confidence, simply because this confidence cleaves to your nature and is indispensable to itself. So here's his point. Faith in the humanities also takes the form that we trust testimony. But here, and that's different from in the natural sciences, different people will trust different testimonials, will accept the testimony of different people. In the humanities then, faith operates in different individuals differently, and this has a twofold cause. First, the objects of the humanistic science studies are not material objects simpliciter, not just stones or raw objects. No, the objects of humanistic studies, they are spiritual in nature. They concern spiritual matters. They concern matters that have meaning, that can be interpreted. In these sciences, says Kuyper, almost everything depends upon the principles one starts out from, the meaning that one attaches to words, and the spiritual tendency by which one is governed. So what he's saying here is the humanistic studies involve faith in a twofold way, because the objects that we study aren't just brute objects or meaningless objects. They are objects that have a particular meaning. And you may have different takes on that. And secondly, other than in the sciences, in the humanities, faith plays not only a formal role, but also becomes the immediate voucher for the content. In the natural sciences, quote, faith renders the exclusively formal service of making us believe in our senses, in the reality of the phenomena, and in the axioms of logic, by which we make our demonstrations. In the humanities, by contrast, faith touches on the content of what we believe. Here's one of his examples. Only because my mother revealed to me who my father was, do I know this as a fact. And this all-important circumstance cannot be certified except by faith in the content of the revelation of my mother. I take it that Kuyper's point can be put as follows. In the life of the natural sciences, the role of faith is that we have foundational beliefs, that our senses are reliable, and that the external world really exists, and that the principles of logic hold. But it's not due to faith that we believe that iron expands when heated, nor that we believe that iron exists. In the humanities, by contrast, faith not only regards in a general sort of way, our reliance on testimony, but also our reliance on specific testimony. For instance, the testimony that William the Conqueror won the Battle of Hastings, or the testimony that there was a Korean War, or that this person was my father. Professor
네,
Chen, are you going?
7페이지 내용으로 들어가겠습니다. 지금까지 6페이지 다 마쳤습니다.
Yeah. So different people have different faith. That is, different people have different foundational beliefs. These differences manifest themselves within the walls of the academia. Now, of course, it might be that some of the differences that occur within the academia are only of a relative sort, just differences of degree. And there's nothing that makes Kuyper doubt this possibility. However, some differences are not differences in degree or differences in emphasis, but differences of principle. A difference is a difference of principle when it's a difference which does not find its origin within the circle of human consciousness, but outside of it. As Kuyper says, the Christian religion places before us this supremely important fact. For it speaks of a regeneration, of a being begotten anew, followed by an enlightening which changes man in his very being, and that indeed by a change or transformation which is effected by a supernatural cause. Unquote. This regeneration, Kuyper says, breaks humanity into two kinds of people. Quote, if this fact of being begotten anew, coming in from without, establishes a real change in the being of man, be it only potentially, and if this changes, if this change exercises at the same time an influence upon his consciousness, then as far as he has or hasn't undergone this transformation, there's an abyss in the universal human consciousness across which no bridge can be laid. So, being born anew, being born again, regeneration involves a definite change in our consciousness. And I read Kuyper here as developing the view that in those people in whom regeneration has taken place, so in those people who have been born again, they are conscious within themselves of very different things from whatever it is that those who are not born again or have not gone through some form of regeneration are aware of. They are, for instance, those in whom regeneration has taken place, they are conscious of the existence of God, of God's perfect goodness and never failing love. They are conscious of the reality of sin and the way it works in our lives and our world. They are conscious of the fact that the world in which we live is God's creation, that human beings are created in God's image. The Christian is inwardly very different from the non-Christian, and consequently, to quote Kuyper, feels a different content rising from his consciousness. Unquote. The Christian and the non-Christian, therefore, face the cosmos from different points of view, and they are impelled by really different impulses. Now let's pause for a moment and have the whole picture before us. We saw that Kuyper holds that the natural sciences and the humanities involve beliefs of the following sort. The belief that sense perception is reliable, that there exists an external world, that law-like regularities hold among things, etc. These beliefs are foundational. That is, we have these beliefs, we are convinced of all these principles without demonstration, without having reasons, without us having acquired those beliefs through some form of reasoning or argument or investigation. Kuyper's argument is that all science proceeds from things accepted solely by faith, that is, from foundational beliefs. And to this, Kuyper adds regeneration. Because of regeneration, Christians are aware of other things than non-Christians will be. They will furthermore have different beliefs, foundational beliefs included the non-Christians. And one of the beliefs of a Christian is that God exists. And this belief, he maintains, can be foundational too. And Kuyper maintains that belief in God makes for a serious difference in science. The upshot of this line of thought is that since scientists inevitably proceed from foundational beliefs, when Christians believe from Christian or theistic foundational beliefs, there is nothing wrong with them on that account.
이렇게 8페이지 제일 위에 요약한 내용을 지금 말씀하셨거든요. 이것이 오늘 강연에서 매우 중요한 핵심 부분이라고 할 수 있겠습니다.
When Kuyper says that Christians have foundational beliefs different from non-Christians, he doesn't mean to say that all foundational beliefs of Christians differ from those of non-Christians. They in fact share many foundational beliefs. What he maintains is that the set of the Christian foundational beliefs, let's call it the foundational set, is not identical with the foundational set of the average non-Christian. The sets as such are different, but different sets may have some of their members communally. And of course, Kuyper thinks examples abound, such as the belief that our faculty of sense perception is reliable. That's a foundational belief. That's an article of faith both of Christians and non-Christians. Or the belief that there's an external world. That's a foundational belief, both in the foundational, or is a member of the foundational set, both of Christians and of non-Christians. It's important to keep this in mind, because otherwise we would go wrong in interpreting Kuyper's saying that the fact that there are two kinds of people leads to two kinds of science. Kuyper suggests, namely, that because theists and non-theists, quote, are differently constituted, they see a corresponding difference in the constitution of all things. They are not at work, therefore, on different parts of the same house, but each builds a house of its own, unquote. Now, I take this to mean that the sum total of the Christians believe, that is the foundational set, plus everything that follows from it by valid forms of inference, is very different from the sum total of the naturalist's belief, or the atheist beliefs. The two houses differ in more than one respect. But this does not mean that all the materials that are being used by the naturalist or the atheist need to be despised by the theist, vice versa. There are lots of shared materials in the two houses, lots of shared beliefs in the two different belief sets. And Kuyper is ready to acknowledge this fact, not grudgingly, but happily. In one quote he says, "There is a very broad realm of investigation in which the difference between the two groups, so those in whom regeneration has taken place and those in which it has not." So there's a very broad realm of investigation in which the difference between the two groups exerts no influence. For in the present dispensation, regeneration works no change in the senses, nor in the plastic conception of visible things. So he says regeneration doesn't renew what you see visually. Red objects continue to appear red even after you were born again, even after regeneration has taken place. And the form that objects have, round or bulgy or square or whatever, those things or those properties, they don't change after regeneration has taken place or has set in. So primary observation is common to both Christians and non-Christians alike. The first, or perhaps the lower parts of the natural sciences, such as observation, measuring, counting, etc., they fall outside of the difference between Christians and non-Christians. This, to repeat it again, doesn't mean that the natural sciences as such and in their entirety fall outside of this difference, but only that in these sciences the difference which separates the two groups exerts no influence on the beginnings of the investigation. That is, not on the observational beginnings of their sciences. But the more the facts are being interpreted, the more likely it is that differences will occur. So I'm almost at the end of my talk.
이제 9페이지 제일 윗부분 말씀하셨고 이제 거의 결론 부분에 왔습니다.
Not only is there common ground with respect to perception, there's also common ground with respect to reasoning. For the formal process of argumentation hasn't been changed due to sin. Now, still more can be said about the relation between the two sciences. So the sciences as being pursued by Christians and as pursued by the atheist. In Christians, regeneration is caught up in a development. Regeneration changes the Christian's conscience potentially. It's sown in her like a seed that in the course of time must be nourished and eventually will bring forth real fruit. But because this process of renewal, where the Apostle Paul talks about in Romans 8, because this process is slow, the two houses will be more similar than in the fullness of time. In the fullness of time we will seem justified. Given the slowness of the process, Christians cannot expect to erect a totally new and even separate building. Furthermore, Kuyper contends, it has to be borne in mind that the fundamental conceptions, which have been starting points of the two groups of scientists, were for many centuries governed already by special revelation. So, Kuyper paints a very rich and complex picture of Christian learning, Christian academic scholarship. So there is communality with what non-Christians do. At the same time, there are differences. He tries to identify where we might expect communalities to arise, and he also tries to pinpoint where we will expect differences and conflicts to arise.
오케이. 이렇게 이제 결론 부분에서 이분이 말씀하신 내용은 아브라함 카이퍼가 일반 우리 넌 크리스천들의 학문과도 공통점이 충분히 있다는 점도 충분하게 인정하면서 설명을 하고, 동시에 또 크리스천과 넌 크리스천이 또 다른 점도 있다.